My name is Jennifer Kurtanis, and I'm your host today for Health Matters, a public health education show produced by the Farmington Valley Health District. Today we're going to talk about vaping. Unfortunately, vaping has become very popular among our youth, and while we don't fully understand the full extent of the health implications, especially for long-term use, because it is still relatively new, there is no doubt that it can be harmful and can lead to other negative and unhealthy outcomes. We're very fortunate today to have with us Kristen Formanak, Director of Social Services and Community Services for the Town of Simsbury, and Chris Montez from the Town of Farmington Juvenile Justice Coordinator. So thank you both very much for being here today to talk about this really important issue and what I perceive to be really one of the emerging public health threats, particularly for our youth. So why don't we just start by talking a little bit about what vaping is. Some folks, this may be relatively new, parents may have heard of it, but can you describe for us exactly what vaping is?
Sure. So originally vaping was something that was created to act as a smoking cessation tool for adults that are using tobacco products. And it includes a device, an electronic device, that vaporizes a liquid that may or may not contain nicotine and at various levels. But unfortunately has spread from its intentional original use of being for adults, and our children and our youth have latched on to using it.
Wow, it's really interesting. So something that seemingly was going to provide a positive tool for people looking to reduce their level of exposure to nicotine, not be exposed to the tar and the secondhand smoke and the burning components of a cigarette, has really gotten into the hands of kids and our youth and is being used for different purposes. With a vaping device, and I know you have some here that you'll show us in a minute, is it just nicotine that can be vaporized and inhaled, or is it being used for other things?
Well, there are several different products that can be used in the vaporizing element, and it depends on what the person purchases. The original intention, as you had said, was to wean an adult off of their nicotine dependence. So the liquids that are sold have various contents of nicotine in them, and some actually have no nicotine, and many of them are flavored. So they come in some flavors that are attractive and appealing to the user. And it has also been used and is being utilized to vaporize THC, which is a derivative of the marijuana plant. So there are all sorts of things, all sorts of contents in these liquids that you can put into the devices. And one might not necessarily know what is in the liquid if you didn't fill it yourself.
Yeah, and I think in a little bit we'll talk about the regulation of these products, but one thing that people really need to be aware of is the fact that kids really have no idea, for instance, how much nicotine they may be exposed to with a particular product, or what else might be in the liquid that they are actually vaporizing and inhaling deep into their lungs. So that certainly raises some concern for us as people concerned about health. So I think one of the things that's really kind of interesting about this is the paraphernalia, the vaping equipment that kids use can easily be disguised as other things. So as a parent, it might be really difficult to ascertain or determine whether our children are actually accessing and using these products. And you've got two simple examples here. Maybe you could hold those up.
Sure. Well, for me, what I kind of compare it to in my mind is when I was growing up and I was a teenager, if I wanted to smoke, it was a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. And we know how sizable that is. And that's very difficult to hide from your parents or hide from school personnel.
Sure.
But these devices are so small. So this is one of the smaller devices. It's called a Juul. And as you can see, this is very tiny. And it actually looks very similar to a USB device for your computer. So you might see this in your child's backpack backpack or in their room, and you might pass it over as a piece of electronic equipment. But it actually has, it comes apart, and this little part of the device is rechargeable and refillable, and this is what you fill with what is called juice. So there's a variety of products that are available to the user. You can see some very large bottles, smaller bottles, and these are all what is called juice. And they come in various sizes, flavors, and content. So for example, this one has 0.3% nicotine in it, and this one has a high percentage of nicotine. So depending on how much you want to have in your device, you would buy these different products. And this one is a little bit larger. This is called a mod. This is more expensive and a little bit harder to hide because it produces a larger amount of vapor that you exhale. But this is what is being used by a lot of our youth to use the electronic delivery systems now for nicotine.
So, Chris, I imagine in your work with the juvenile justice coordinator, you work with kids closely, kids that maybe have the propensity to experiment with this type of thing. How are they accessing? How are they purchasing this? I know with cigarettes now, you can't just take them off of the counter at the checkout. You have to ask the clerk. I think they are being more careful about, carding and making sure they're selling to children over, young adults over the age of 18. I do see vape shops, which I think, probably have to ensure that they're selling. But how are kids accessing these things?
They can buy them on the web. It's very easy to misrepresent your age on the web, and all you need is a way to purchase it, like a credit card. So you could even use your parents' credit card. Lots of kids that we see buy them from friends. Obviously, those friends have to get them somewhere. Get them from another adult or another friend. They seem to be passed along, and there really is no shortage of them. So, coming from very many different areas, and obviously it's easy to just know somebody who's 18 and say, hey, pick me up a Juul or pick me up a vape, pay them a few extra dollars, and you get it.
Yeah. So I was, as a public health director, very excited to learn that the city of Hartford will actually be increasing the age of purchase to 21. And this is something that was raised in the legislature last year and failed, but I'm hoping statewide gets revisited. There's a lot of evidence in the literature that increasing the age of purchase for tobacco and also vaping types of products really can dissuade a younger population. First of all, it's less likely they would know a 21-year-old that would be willing at that stage and level of maturity to purchase something for them. It's less likely that an underage young adult would, at 16 you could probably pass for 18, but at 16 it's a little bit harder to pass for 21 to purchase these things. So it'll be interesting to see if the rest of the state moves in that direction, but it could be one step in trying to prevent the younger kids from really accessing both the devices as well as the product. So one thing that we haven't talked about yet is really the public health concerns related to vaping. And anytime you're aerosolizing a liquid, and a liquid that is ingested or is aerosolized and breathed deep into the lung, ultrafine particles are introduced into the deepest tissue of the lung that really can cause anything from irritating types of effects to an emerging issue called popcorn lung, where it's really adversely affecting the alveoli of your lung, where that's where the oxygen is transferred into the bloodstream. So a very important part of the lung. Irritation of the mucous membranes, eyes, nose, and throat can all be, more acute types of health effects associated with vaping. But there's also negative consequences to the heart and circulation, particularly when you're using a nicotine-based substance, which can really cause, changes in blood pressure, changes in heart rate, and that sort of thing. And that is in part of the draw for many people for using nicotine. The fact that young children using this product, and by young I mean anywhere from 12 to 18 years of age, might not understand what a bottle means when it says 0.3% nicotine. You can actually have nicotine poisoning associated with the use of this, right? At this point, there's really little or no regulation about contents, the labeling of the product yet. So we know that there are adverse health consequences, and there's a growing body of evidence that is also identifying carcinogenic substances in the vapor that is inhaled. So while it takes a very long time to and longer time studying a new product like this, we probably can anticipate over time that we will see cancer risks, et cetera, associated with this. So it's important for parents to understand, despite what their kids are saying, that this is a healthier alternative, it is not risk-free. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about how common vaping is among our youth? To me, it seems like I hear so many stories from colleagues that are working in the school system and parents who are concerned that, this is really quite rampant. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Sure. It depends on the school system and the demographics of each town, but in general, about 25% of high schoolers say that they have tried it. Whether or not they're regularly using it, that's not so much. But of those who do, about 66% of them are using just for the flavoring, and about close to 6% are using the THC through the vaping device, and then about 7% are using the nicotine. So looking at those demographics and those of the kids that are using it, the 9th through 12th grade, you got a considerable number of kids that are using these pens, and we're seeing that at our juvenile review board, because these kids are actually, this is illegal, so you do get arrested in the town of Farmington and you get sent to the juvenile review board. You could be sent to juvenile court as well, but instead they come to juvenile review board, and we have seen an uptake of those kids.
Yeah. And just to add in, I think one of the issues also is the social issue connected with the vaping. As you had mentioned, Jennifer, when the kids are using this, you're seeing increases in your heart rate and real physical effects that happen in your body immediately when you're using this product. Our kids are using this while they're in school, and it's not uncommon. In fact, it's very likely that they're using it in the classroom while the teacher is teaching. As Chris had said, those numbers, those percentages are very high, and if we look at Simsbury High School and the number of kids in that school, you're talking about 300 kids that are using these products. And they are doing it in the classroom, they're doing it in the halls. Sure. So what is the impact that it's having on their ability to be present in school and their ability to be present for learning?
Right,
It's
absolutely.
very easy to tuck one of these right in here like this and just be sitting
in the classroom,
and you just, inhale it and then blow it right back into your sleeve.
Yeah, as you alluded to, when we were growing up, it was cigarettes. There was an odor associated with that. So it was very hard to disguise with your parents. There was a cloud of smoke. It was very hard to disguise, but with these products, kids really can be very, very
invasive.
It can be done right in front front or under anybody's nose. And I think you bring up a great point. As much as we are really concerned about, the physical health implications of that, the mental health implications, the learning, the ability to learn and focus when you're, particularly, if you're doing, using nicotine-related vaping product in the classroom, just the mere activity of doing it could be distracting from your learning, et cetera. And Chris, you mentioned, and I think that's something that probably some are not familiar with, that it is illegal.
Yes.
And you are seeing an increasing number of kids, if I understand, coming through the juvenile system. And so what are the implications of that when a child is found doing this in school underage? What happens?
Well, the school has its own policies in terms of any type of detention or suspension, but then the school resource officer also will make a report and an arrest, and hopefully the youth is eligible to go to the juvenile review board, meaning that if they haven't been arrested before, that's typically the condition. So they come before the juvenile review board, and often we find that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Mm-hmm. These kids aren't, your straight A students that are playing 2 or 3 sports and doing everything by the book. They are, in fact, kids who are messing around with other types of substances and maybe in trouble in other ways. Many of them have family problems at home. So really, it's just a symptom of something else. Mm-hmm. We're really seeing that in a big way.
Yeah.
And by the way, something that I just thought of, about 14% of the kids who use don't even know which product there is that they're using, mm-hmm. whether it's marijuana or THC based, or it's nicotine or anything. So that's a huge number. They're inhaling something that they have no clue what is in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's important for, parents to understand, certainly not all kids that are experimenting with vaping are engaged. However, it's certainly in other things. However, it's really an important, conversation for parents. They need to have their eyes wide open that this, in fact, could be the tip of the iceberg, and not to just dismiss it as, oh, they're just experimenting with vaping, but rather let's just really explore what's going on. Right. So that's really important. We talked about, flavors which make it appealing, particularly to young kids, and we have reports in Connecticut that through youth surveys that kids as young as 12 are experimenting with that. And I can see why the flavors might be appealing, particularly to a younger group. But why else is vaping, do you think, becoming so prevalent among our youth?
Well, I think, like you said, the flavors are definitely attractive to the youth. Like this one here is blue raspberry candy. And
who wouldn't want blue raspberry candy?
It sounds amazing to do in the middle of the day. But it is just for FYI for parents, if you're on the lookout, like you said, keeping your eyes open, but also keeping your nose open, because these, when you do vaporize them, there is a smell, usually a fruity smell involved with the exhale of the vapor. So if you notice that with your teen and you don't think it's perfume, maybe look into it a little bit farther. The other reason why it's so prevalent is the advertising. It's being made to be super sexy. This is the new thing to do, to have a vape, to have a Juul. And it's very prevalent on our social medias that our kids are exposed to all day long. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And a lot of your high-profile individuals are using them, our actors, our sports persons. So our kids are being exposed to this all the time. And also just the peer pressure amongst themselves. Mm-hmm. And you are right, we are seeing younger kids. Our juvenile review board is designed very similarly to Farmington, in that if you're under the age of 16, you may be arrested if you're in possession of this at school, and then you may be sitting before the juvenile review board. And we have had at least 2 instances of middle school children coming before us for using these. Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, as a parent, is shocking to see a 13-year-old in possession and using nicotine. nicotine products and being arrested.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a number of different issues in what you guys have just described. One, I think, Chris, you were talking about the percent of kids that have actually seen or been exposed to social media, which is really astounding.
7 out of 10 kids, are actively, whatever they're doing, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or whatnot, 7 out of 10 kids report that they have seen some sort of advertising that's directed towards them.
Yeah, that's the targeting.
Huge.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, and it seems so discouraging to me if you think back to like the Joe Camel days. It's the marketing for these products is no different in many respects to how cigarettes were marketed way back in the day to youth. Sports figures, celebrities, presenting it as being cool, etc. And it's, you just hate to see a whole nother generation sucked into, that marketing campaign. But that's really where we are today.
It's a brand new addiction.
Yeah.
We've heard kids say, smoking is so nasty, I would never do that. That's why I do this. Really?
Yeah.
Now, back in the 1950s, there used to be billboards, and not that I was around then, but I've definitely, you can look back. Smoke Chesterfield, more doctors smoke Chesterfield than any other cigarette. That was a billboard.
Yeah.
More doctors, it must be a good thing, right?
Right.
So for kids to say, well, smoking is just nasty, it smells and this and that, so this is much better.
Yeah. So along those lines, is it reasonable for our kids are being exposed to these messages that it is safer. I've talked about some of the health implications, but I think beyond the public health issues, which we know it's not safe, some of the things that concern us, I think, are the fact that it's renormalizing smoking. And there's a statistic that states that a certain percentage of kids that start with vaping, there's a much higher rate of them moving on to cigarettes, in fact. So I think the renormalizing of tobacco use through the vaping products is really disconcerting to me.
Right. So it was meant to go one way, but instead it's gone the other.
Exactly. What are some of the current laws regarding vaping devices? I know we've talked about the age of purchase is 18, and that for possession under the age of 18, there are fines, and your systems are dealing with it. But what do we know about other regulation with FDA? Do you know?
Well, I know that sales in the state of Connecticut, if anybody should sell to a minor under the age of 18, there's to start a $200 fine right off the bat. So to sell it, obviously there's disincentive to stores and smoking stores that might do that. But
the online purchase that you mentioned is hard.
Again, yes, the online, there's really no regulation on that.
Yeah.
And that's the bigger concern, is that there's no regulation for the online, and anyone can go in and put a fake birth date, and then you have access to these products. And if you have a gift card for that online store, you can get it delivered right to your home and pick up the mail before your parents get home.
Yeah. And then I think a perfect example of how business and industry has gotten ahead of government and regulation, it's not until this year, 2018, now these devices have been available for a long time, but it's not until this year that FDA will be requiring any type of warning statement on the packaging. So we've had years where, again, it feeds into the kids' assumption that it's safe because there's no warning labels. And it won't be until next year that FDA actually requires the manufacturers to provide information on the harmful constituents of their product. So to me, this is just a travesty in terms of what's gotten out there, what kids are exposed to, and we're playing catch up.
And who is already addicted.
And who is already addicted or will continue to move on to other things potentially. Just very, very briefly, we only have about 30 seconds left. Are there any suggestions you have for how parents can and should engage their kids in conversation about the use of vaping devices?
Easy to do. I think just be upfront with your young person about it and say, this has propylene glycol. It's used to de-ice airplane wings in the wintertime. Do you really want that in your lungs? And just open it up. And
Yeah.
know your kids' friends. That's
Yeah.
important. If your kids' friends are using, likely your kid is.
Yeah, very good suggestions.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today for this issue of Health Matters. Again, if you are a parent of a child, please take the time to talk to them about vaping, the health consequences of vaping. And despite what they might tell you that they've learned on social media that it is a safer alternative, vaping really is becoming the new public health crisis for our youth. And anything that we can do to stem the rising tide of its use among our kids is really an important public health importance. Until next time, remember, your health is your greatest wealth. Thank you.